started here. So we've been talking for a couple of weeks about having Dr. Jason Lyle come into our church on April 29th. I did want to share a little bit about that. I know Dane's been talking about it and sharing who he is and where he's from and all that. He's from back east. I think he lives in New Jersey. But he is an astrophysicist. He's a believer in Jesus. And what he does, and I've heard him speak every year for the last probably 5 years. He comes to a conference that I go to every year. But what he is, he's a scientist, but he looks at the Bible, and as he looks at the Bible, he looks at it from the view of science, but sees how that science is the best explanation to explain our world is, and science that we have is through Genesis and through God's creation, and how we can look at God's creation and Genesis specifically, and how our world all fits together. And he's going to be talking specifically about that. He has many other talks on logic and other things that in our world, but the one he's going to be giving us is going to be on Genesis. And the reason for that is when we finish up in the book of John, I want to go through Genesis. We're going to go back to the Old Testament and go through Genesis, and just because it sets the whole foundation for the whole Bible and how we look at the rest of the Bible. But with that, we have a video to show you this morning. It's only a minute, just over a minute long. It's just kind of a promotion for him coming, and I'd encourage you guys. It's going to be on our Facebook page, but I've reached out to the other churches in our area, and I've invited them. Some of them expressed interest, so I'm hoping that they join us. But share this with anybody. And encourage them to come, hear somebody who has a brilliant mind. And even though he has a brilliant mind, people like to think that science disproves the Bible. And he goes from the other perspective and says that it actually proves the Bible instead of disproving it. And he'll look at it from that perspective. So with that, we're going to show a video for you, and then we'll get into our study in John this morning.
You see, the real issue behind the creation versus evolution debate, it's really God's word versus man's word. Bottom line, that's what it's about. And that's the same as all these other issues we have in society. Are we going to do what God says, or are we going to do it some other way? And whenever we do it some other way, it just never works out well. How about that? If you think about it, we have such a tremendous blessing because, the United States of America founded primarily by Christians, certainly on Christian principles, and as a result, we have this wonderful Christian heritage. We have the most Christian churches, seminaries, Christian colleges, bookstores, Christian radio and television of any nation. It's a wonderful blessing. And yet, for all of these Christian resources, would you say that we as a nation are becoming more Christian every day or less Christian every day?
I'd encourage you, on April 29th, it's a Monday, okay? Most people don't have a lot of things going on a Monday night, okay? So you should have that open and available, and bring some friends, invite others. I have invited some of the guys I used to work with who've always been intrigued. I used to go through creation versus evolution and talk about Noah's flood and things like that, and I've invited them to come. Whether or not they come, I don't know, but it's a privilege to be able to have somebody that has his brain and his intellect, even though he's so brilliant, he's so brilliant, and he sees that God is the only way to explain the world that we live in. It has to be through a creator, and that's the only way we can be here. So I encourage you to come to that, and if you want to share that video on Facebook or somewhere else, then please do so. I would love to fill this room and make it packed in here for him. So with that, we're going to be in John chapter 11 this morning. John chapter 11, so if you can turn in your Bibles there. When we left off last week, Jesus had been in the temple and was trapped by the religious leaders, where they questioned him. And through the questioning, they were angered and they wanted to stone him. They had surrounded him, and even though they had stones in their hands ready to throw at him and kill him, he was able to escape. It said that he escaped from them, and he left Jerusalem for the area where his ministry began, down on the Jordan River, where John the Baptist had declared, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Jerusalem has become too hostile for Jesus at this point, and he knew this. And his ministry he's no longer able to minister in the way that he wants to, where it's going to be effective, because the religious leaders are attacking him everywhere he goes, and he's not able to minister to the people that want to listen. So he goes to an area in the Jordan River, in the Jordan River Valley, where people want to hear from him, and they want to hear who he is and the things that he has to say, and he's able to work there effectively. His ministry, though, in Jerusalem isn't done. He's going to come back, and we're going to see how he comes back into that area this morning. And this is where we're going to pick it up today. In John chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. If you guys want to stand with me in honor of God's word, we'll read it together. So John chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. This is going to be kind of a two-part thing we're doing today, this week, and then we'll finish up this story next week with Lazarus. But beginning verse 1, it says, "Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, 'Lord, even he whom you love is sick.' Or behold, he whom you love is sick." When Jesus heard that, he said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him." Then the disciples said, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well." However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him." Then Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world." Jesus, we just thank you for this text. Thank you for this wonderful miracle that you performed, Lord, by raising Lazarus from the dead. Even though he'd been dead for multiple days. It wasn't like he just died, Lord, and there could be an explanation as to how you did this, Lord, but you waited for him to start the decomposition process. His body was decomposing when you brought him life back into his body, Lord. And as we dig into this today and we look at it, Lord, I just pray that you just speak to us each individually as you care for us each individually, Lord, because you love us so much and you care intimately for each one of us, Lord. And as we'll see that this morning as we look into this text, Lord, I just pray that you just go before us this morning. We invite you into our presence. In Jesus' name, amen. You guys can be seated. Here in this story, we are introduced for the first time to a man named Lazarus. We haven't heard about him before this in John's gospel, and he's only talked about in this book. He's not spoken of in the other 3 gospels. This is the only book that speaks of his life. This is unusual because this is one of the most impressive miracles that Jesus performed during his life, but we only hear about it from John. He's the only gospel that shares about Lazarus being dead for 4 days and coming back to life. The other 3 gospels don't say anything about it. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't share about it in their writings. But yet Lazarus would have still been known by them. He would have been known by them because we're told that he is the brother of Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha we know well. We have several stories of them in the Gospels, but yet Lazarus is never mentioned other than in this Gospel of John's. John's Gospel, one of the reasons why I believe that is the case is because Matthew, Mark, and Luke, one of the things that happened with Lazarus after he was raised from the dead is the people wanted him killed. The religious leaders were looking for a way to kill him, and we'll see this next week when we get into the last half of the story. But they wanted to kill him because they knew that he was a living testimony of one of Jesus' greatest miracles. And he could go around and say, yep, I was dead. I was physically dead. He could share about what that experience was like. We don't know what that was like, but he could share about that. And his sisters could talk about that with those who were around them. He was a well-known person. He came from a wealthy family. We know this because Mary we'll see that she uses this costly ointment and she anoints Jesus' his feet. And they had money. He was a prominent person in their society. And for a prominent person to die and be dead and to go through the stages of grief that they would have gone through in those 4 days and then be raised back to life, that's going to make an impact. And people wanted him killed as a result of this because it was spreading the gospel. So when Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote their books, they likely knew Lazarus, and he was still alive during that time. They wrote their Gospels closer to when Jesus ascended to heaven than John. John's Gospel was written years later, but when their Gospels were written, they didn't want to go and put pressure on him. They wouldn't have wanted others to know about this and bring attention to him and highlight that part, highlight him, and put him at risk of the religious leaders and others that would have been around. But when John goes and writes his gospel, he wrote it when he was in his 90s. And Lazarus most likely would have died at that point. He would have been died and would have been in heaven forever. And so there wasn't the risk of not showing this for us. And I'm really glad he did share it with us so we can have it. With this, though, we have Jesus speaking about his 2 sisters, Lazarus' 2 sisters. His 2 sisters are mentioned several places in the Gospels. But this is the first time that John is mentioning them with Mary and Martha. We have a story in Luke chapter 10 where Jesus came to Martha's home, we're told. And we were told that Martha got caught up in being the host and serving at the house. And Mary, we were told, sat at Jesus' feet and listened to him. Martha was upset with her sister because she was left to do all the work of being the host. She was doing it all on her own, and she complained to Jesus about this. But Jesus rebuked Martha and told her that Mary had chosen the greater because she was listening to him and sitting at his feet. And she wasn't distracted with much serving as Martha was. These 2 women are sisters, but they have very different personalities, it would seem. We will see this come into play with how Jesus interacts with each of them in this chapter. He will not speak to them in the same way. He will be sensitive to each of their individual needs in the same way he knows us individually and is sensitive to each of our individual needs and how he ministers to each one of us and shares with us. John also clarifies for us that this is the Mary who had anointed Jesus with the fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. John will tell us about this story in the next chapter, in chapter 12, but he is letting the readers know who this Mary is. If you know the Gospels very well, you know that there's several Marys mentioned in the Gospels. We have Mary, the mother of Jesus. We have Mary Magdalene. We have Mary and Martha. And there's another Mary, and I meant to look it up between services. But there's one other Mary. There's 4 Marys total spoken about in the Gospels. And when you read through them, you're like, okay, well, how do we differentiate and understand which Mary this is talking about? Well, John knows this is a confusing thing in the church of that day. And so he points out, even though he hasn't spoken about Mary and Martha or mentioned them in his gospel at this point, he's highlighting this is the Mary. Many people would have known the other stories of Mary who anointed Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And so he's sharing, this is that Mary. It's Mary and Martha. It was her brother who's the one that is Lazarus. That's the highlight or the focus of this story this morning. We're told that Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, is sick. This is what we begin with. We aren't told exactly what he is sick with, what caused him to be sick. He may have had an infection, he may have had an injury, we don't know. But what we do know is that he was sick enough that this is going to lead to his death. It's going to cause him to die. And his sisters recognize the severity of his sickness, and they send word to Jesus to let him know about Lazarus' condition. The word or message they send is, Lord, he whom you love is sick. The word that is used there for love is the word phileo, meaning a friendship kind of love. This isn't an affectionate love or a brotherly kind of love. They don't use the word agape in their message, but they use instead the word phileo. Agape is an unconditional love that Jesus has for us. But they instead appeal to the friendship that they knew Jesus felt for Lazarus. They essentially say, Jesus, your dear friend Lazarus is sick. These are Jesus' friends. These are the ones he has shared meals with. He broke bread with them, and he has likely stayed with them and slept in their home. Jesus, they feel, cares for them in a different way than he does for the others, whom they have seen him heal. They have likely seen him heal total strangers, people whom he didn't even know. And now their brother is sick, and they are worried about him, and they know he is dying. And they send word to Jesus saying, Jesus, your friend Lazarus is sick. He is dying. They're sending word to Jesus because they want him to come and heal their brother. This is why they're sending word to Jesus. This is why they are telling him about Lazarus being sick. They don't want Jesus to come, or they don't want Jesus just to think of them and pray for them, pray that God will come for them in this hard time. No, they want him to physically come and heal their brother. They know he can do this. Jesus also knows this is why they're asking him to come. He doesn't misunderstand their message, even though it may seem that he does. He doesn't misunderstand it. He is fully going to understand what they are asking of him and the way they're appealing to him. One of the things this shows us is we can have a close, intimate relationship with Jesus. We can have a friendship kind of love with him, as Mary and Martha have, but that will not exclude us from facing hardships and difficulties in life. We can have this kind of relationship, this kind of friendship with Jesus, and we can still go through difficulties. We will still face tragedies, and we will appeal to Jesus in those tragedies. But how Jesus responds to those tragedies, to our prayers, is not always how we would like him to respond. He may not always answer our prayers in the way we want him to. Mary and Martha want Jesus to come right then. They want him to drop everything he is doing so he can come now and save their brother's life. But Jesus is going to delay. He is going to wait to come. He's not going to come at this immediate moment. He's going to wait 2 days, we're going to find out. Verse 4. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Jesus, when he hears about Lazarus being sick, says that this sickness isn't unto death. He doesn't mean Lazarus wasn't going to die. Lazarus, we will see, does die from this sickness, and it is highly probable that he was already dead at the time that Jesus received this message from them. He's likely already dead, because by the time he gets there, it's going to say that he had been dead for 4 days. So when he receives the message, more than likely Lazarus has already died when he gets this. But Jesus, being God, he is not saying that Lazarus isn't going to die, but being God, he has the gift of foreknowledge. He knew in the end Lazarus would live, and his life would bring glory to God. God was going to be glorified through this. Jesus doesn't see this sickness trapped in this moment in time. He sees what it will do in the long run. He sees what will happen through it, and this is why he is able to say, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. He knows what is going to happen. He knows the end of the chapter before it even happens. But even though he knows the end of the chapter, he will still live in this moment in time. He will still relate and share in the grief of these two sisters whose brother has died. He is not insensitive to their needs, even though he knows the joy that they will soon experience from having to go through this. Verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Mary and Martha had sent word to Jesus, telling him Lazarus, the man he loved, was sick. His friend was sick. John tells us Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. He doesn't say he loved their family, but he says he loves Martha. He loves Mary. He loves Lazarus. He individually and pointedly makes a break between each of them as he says he loves them. He singles them all out, and he is showing he has a personal love for each of them, just like he has a personal love for each one of us. Also, the word for love that John uses here is agape, which is an unconditional love. Jesus loved them unconditionally. He loved them with a greater love than phileo. He agaped them. John, I believe, is telling us this because it won't seem like Jesus loves them or cares for them at all. He hears that his friend is sick, and instead of dropping everything, he delays and takes his time in going to them. This doesn't appear that he loves them at all. If he really cared about them, you would think he would have gone right to them when they called. But Jesus delays. This, we could say, is a divine procrastination by Jesus. He purposefully delayed in coming. He gets word his friend Lazarus is dying, and he stays for 2 more days where he was. We aren't told he had work he needed to finish where he was at. It didn't say that he was in the middle of ministering to other people or that he was performing other miracles, that there's other people sick. It doesn't say any of that. It just says that he stayed. He stayed for 2 more days. He didn't go and leave when they had asked him to. Every indication we have is that Jesus got word and he purposefully stayed where he was. This is why John tells us, I think, that Jesus had an agape love for Mary and Martha. Because in this moment, when we see him delay, it doesn't appear that he has that kind of love for them. Instead, it almost appears he doesn't care for them at all. But Jesus does love them, and because he has an agape love for them, this is why he delays. He is always thinking of how he can affect us in the long term rather than in the short term. Jesus is always thinking about how our life on this earth will impact our life in eternity. And because of this, he delays for Mary and Martha here. For their sake, he delays because he knows the greater impact his delay will have on their lives and on others. And the greater impact is that we are still here today, looking at this story and learning from it and gleaning from it because of this delay, because he chose to wait and not go at that moment when they first called for him. For us, though, we don't like when Jesus delays in our lives. We don't like the pain that can come with Jesus delaying. We want Jesus to fix and heal our pain right now in the moment when we are in pain. But sometimes Jesus lets us remain in that pain, not because he doesn't love us, but because he does love us, because he agapes us. It is his agape love that restrains him. His unconditional love for us is what restrains him. If Jesus only phileoed us, if he only loved us as a friend, he would come right whenever we called him. He would drop everything because his focus would be on relieving the pain in that moment. His focus would be on the here and now rather than on our future. This does not mean he does not love us. He does love us. It doesn't mean that he loves us any less, but it proves that he instead loves us even more. The greatest example of this kind of love is the cross. When Jesus' disciples saw Jesus go to the cross, when his mother saw him hanging on the cross and he looked down on her and he saw the suffering that she was going through and his disciples were going through and seeing the anguish that they were going through seeing him dying, as he is going through the dying process that he was going through. If Jesus had only had phileo love in those moments, he would have been moved by their grief and he would have come down from the cross and not died at all. He would have given them what they wanted. They, I'm sure, were asking and begging God to go and bring Jesus off that cross and bring him and to prevent him from dying. But had he done that, he never would have been able to pay for our sins, and we wouldn't have been able to go and live in eternity with him. As a parent, you can relate to this. There are times where our kids are struggling to do something, and we see them, and they're struggling, and they're working at it, and they just are begging you and asking you, can you please help me do this? Can you just do it for me? Can you just do it for me? Can you go and help me do this so I don't have to do it because it's too hard, right? And if you go and you intercede, and there are times, sometimes you do step in, and you're like, yep, I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to help you out. But if I go and I step in every single time my kids go and ask me for help, they're never going to learn how to do things on their own. They're wanting to learn how to tie their shoes, they go and if I don't teach them how to tie their shoes, and every time they ask to have their shoes tied, I bend down, tie their shoe, they're going to be an adult walking around with slip-on shoes or Velcro shoes the rest of their life. They're never going to grow and graduate out of wearing Velcro shoes. Maybe they'll wear cowboy boots. I like cowboy boots, right? Right? That's okay. But they're never going to grow beyond that. They're never going to learn to be able to get through those struggles and what it's like to be able to struggle a little bit. And when we go through struggles, that's when God shapes and molds us. That's when our character is being built and why God allows us to go through these things. And this is the kind of love that he has for us. He goes and he agapes us. He loves us unconditionally, and he allows pain to come into our lives because he knows what that produces. Jesus doesn't just phileo us, he agapes us. He loves us unconditionally, and he has his eyes always on eternity. He has them on our eternity, and because of this, he delays at times. He doesn't give us our requests in the moment we ask for them every time. He doesn't prevent us from experiencing loss and hardship or heartache, because he knows what those things will produce in our lives. He knows he will work all things together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. It's because he's read the end of the chapter. He's read the end of the chapter. He knows what's going to happen. We don't get to read the end of the chapter until we get there. We have to go through stuck in time as we're going through the chapter. But he has already read the end. He knows what's going to come from the things that he puts us through. This doesn't make it any easier for us or less painful as we're going through our trials, as we'll see in this story. But it does create a greater opportunity for fruit to be born through our lives. No one likes to be told that Jesus is building character in their life when they are in the midst of pain. Character building comes through hurts. It's often caused by pain. But through that pain comes fruit. No one likes being told, James 1:2-4, which says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience." I don't want to hear that when I'm in the midst of a trial. I don't want you to come to me and say, hey, you know what? God's producing patience in you. I'm like, yeah, I don't want patience in my life right now. I want to get through this. No. But what James finishes with saying is, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be lacking nothing. No one likes being told that. These words aren't very comforting when you are in the midst of a trial or testing. But it doesn't mean that they aren't true. Truth is still truth no matter how we feel about it. While we are in a trial, we don't like hearing this, but after the trial, we can see that James was right. We can see that Jesus grew us through the trial. He sustains us through them, and when they seem like, and it may seem like he's only sustaining us 1 minute at a time, but we have to just get through 1 minute, and then another minute, and eventually those minutes add up to being an hour. And then those hours add up to being days. And those days add up to being weeks. And then we're able to get to a point where we're able to look back and say, I can now see God sustained me through it all. Sometimes it took minutes. I only can get through 1 minute and the next minute and the next minute. But those all connected together. And now I can see and look back with hindsight and see God brought me through that. It was through Jesus bringing me through that I'm able to go and look back and see what he built in my life and the character that was built through that and the increased devotion that we have for him through those trials that we go through. The other thing I know is Jesus' delays are not his denials. We have 3 different incidences in John's gospel where Jesus was asked to do something, and he didn't respond and do it right away. When he was asked, he delayed instead. This is one of them that we're looking at today, but another one, it was when Jesus was in Cana for the wedding, back in chapter 2. Jesus was asked by his mother to do something about there not being any wine. They had ran out of wine. And Jesus didn't do anything immediately. He delayed in making the wine. Then we have in chapter 7, where Jesus' brothers asked him to go with him to Jerusalem from Galilee for the Feast of Tabernacles. And Jesus didn't go with his brothers, but he delayed and came up later into Jerusalem. It wasn't that Jesus didn't want to do these things, but when the requests were made, Jesus waited for God's timing. Jesus' delays were not his denials. The delays brought a greater glory to God because Jesus responded in God's timing rather than our timing, rather than the man's timing. And this is what we always want. It doesn't mean that we don't ask God. We still plead to God and we ask for God to be interceding in our life, but we ask that he does it in our timing and that we are able to be sustained until his timing, until it is his timing, that we can wait for his timing because it will bring more glory to him, and that's what we ultimately want. Verse 7. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of the world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." After delaying 2 days, Jesus tells his disciples they are now going to Judea. They are going back to the area of Jerusalem, to Bethany. This is the place where Jesus was just at, where the religious leaders had tried stoning him. They wanted him dead. They wanted him killed. But he had escaped supernaturally. The disciples are confused by this. They don't know why, after Jesus had escaped from a place, he would want to go back to it. They also knew he had the ability to heal someone when he wasn't present with them. So he didn't have to go to Bethany to heal Lazarus. We have a story where he healed the nobleman's son, and he healed him from being 20 miles away. When Jesus went and said to the nobleman, he came to Jesus and he pleaded on his son's behalf that Jesus would heal him. Jesus said, "Go, your son has been made well." And it said that he went back and his boy had been made well at the same exact hour that Jesus had said those words, that he was able to determine. It was the same time of day when Jesus said the words. Jesus wasn't there. He doesn't have to be present for a miracle to take place. He doesn't have to be in Bethany in order to go and heal Lazarus. The disciples know this. They could sit there and think, well, you just have to say the word, and Lazarus can be dead, or be raised from the dead, or he can be healed from whatever he's going through. So they don't understand why he wants to put himself back into harm's way, and they're bringing this to his attention. But Jesus makes a point for them by saying, are there not 12 hours in a day? In other words, when do we work? We work during the day when it is light. We only have so much time in a day before the light runs out. Once it is night and it's dark, the work needs to be finished. Before this, Jesus knows his time on this earth for his earthly ministry is about to be done. He has almost finished his work, and there are only a few more hours left in the day, so to speak, to get this work done. Jesus may have had a divine delay in going to Lazarus, but he still has work to do, work to accomplish. For us, we all have work that God has asked us to do on this earth, and he has given each of us a set amount of time. He gives us enough time to accomplish everything he asks us to do, but we need to ensure we use the time well that he gives us. Once this life is over, it will be night, where we no longer will have an opportunity to do kingdom work on this earth. That time will be expired and will be in eternity forever. And this is, we're told, is a good thing. That when we are in heaven, Paul tells us in Philippians 1:21, "For me to live is Christ and to die is gain." As long as we are alive, we are in the light of day, as Jesus is speaking about here to his disciples, and we are to be about his work. But when we die, it is to our gain as a Christian, because we will be with Jesus in heaven for eternity. This is what Paul was saying in Philippians. Last week, for those who went to the men's conference for the guys, one of the things Mitch emphasized was, one of his points was, do not be lazy. He literally said that. He goes, don't be lazy. We are not called to be lazy. We are not called to waste our lives on ourselves and our pleasures. Proverbs mentions those who are lazy repeatedly, and those who are lazy are never spoken of in a good light. One example of this is in Proverbs 24, verses 30 through 34. It says, I went by the field of the lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding. And there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its walls were broken down. When I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and considered and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. So shall your poverty come like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. We are not called to be lazy. We are not called to receive God's gift of forgiveness and then sit around because we know we are secure. No, we are called to be about God's work. We only have so much time to make an impact with the life we have been gifted with. We have all been called to go and make disciples of all peoples. When Jesus said that to his disciples before he ascended to heaven, that wasn't just intended for his disciples. That was a command for all of us. We're not supposed to go and receive his gift of forgiveness and then just say, oh man, I made it. Sweet. I can just live my life now and I can live for Jesus, but I don't have to tell anybody else about it. No, we have been called and we have been commissioned to go and be his hands and feet and tell others the gift that we have received and be an example for others to be able to see that. This is what God's called us to do. How that looks for each one of us is different. But one thing I know is we only have so much time. And once that time is up, we won't get it back. It's used up for permanently. We cannot go and draw from a bank account, so to speak, on our time and say, okay, I want more time for this. No, once that time's used, it's gone. It's gone forever. We are called to use our time to be about God's work. Jesus isn't letting the idea of possibly being killed stop him from the work he knows he has been called to do. And he says that he's going to return to Judea, even though he knows what's waiting for him there. This will be his last journey. When he comes here, this is going to be the weeks leading up to the Passover. This will be his last time coming in to Jerusalem, knowing he's going to be giving up his life for us. His time on this earth is about to expire, but yet he's still willing to go and and do the work that God has asked him to do. He's willing to go through that. Verse 11. These things he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Jesus tells the disciples that Lazarus is asleep, and they think the same thing we would think when we hear this, and they assume that is a good thing. When we sleep and we are sick, this is often how healing takes place. But Jesus wasn't talking about Lazarus being asleep as in resting, but he clearly points out that Lazarus is dead. The saying that someone is asleep when they die is a common way to say that someone has died in the Bible. Many of the different gospel writers or the writers in the Bible use that terminology, saying that someone had been asleep. Jesus said of Jairus' daughter when she had died that she was only asleep when she was in fact dead. Stephen, when he was martyred in the book of Acts for his faith, it said that he fell asleep, but we know that this meant he died. The reason the disciples think Jesus is speaking of physical sleep is because he tells them that he is going to Bethany to wake him back up. He's going there to wake him up. They don't understand that he means to bring him back to life. They think like he's just going to go wake him up from a nap, and that's what they're talking about here. But this isn't the reason why he's going there. They don't understand this, but Jesus tells them plainly. For us, we can understand that he's telling them that he's going there to raise him back to life. Jesus also said that he was glad he was not there for their sake. He was glad he wasn't in Bethany with his disciples when Lazarus died for his disciples' sake. He is glad that they didn't have to witness their friend dying. But also he's glad because he knows, because he wasn't there and he delayed, it will bring them a comfort that they never would have had Lazarus not died. Someone said regarding this incident with Lazarus, and I like this. He said, we may learn that he often, speaking of God, permits us to pass into profounder darkness and deeper mysteries of pain in order that we may prove more perfectly his power. Jesus sometimes allows us to go through deeper pains, go through some things that are more difficult for us, because it magnifies God's power and his glory in our lives. And it will magnify how we interact with him and our relationship with him. And it will be magnified in a way, had we not gone through those difficulties, we would not have understood the way, the deep understanding that we can have of him as a result of going through difficulties. God grows us through those things, and he uses those things to magnify himself in our lives and make himself even bigger, as we're going to see as we look at Martha next. This is why Jesus is why he's allowing his disciples and Mary and Martha to go through this. There is something for his disciples and Mary and Martha and others that there's something that they're going to gain from having to go through this terrible pain of losing their friend and their brother. Verse 16 says, then Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Thomas, a man we don't know much about, is mentioned here. He's the one disciple, when you think of Thomas and you hear his name, you probably immediately think of Jesus being raised from the dead and him not being present at Jesus' resurrection. When he first appeared to the disciples, he wasn't there. He didn't see. And then when the disciples told him about Jesus coming back to life and that they saw him, he's like, I don't believe it. I won't believe it until I can physically put my hand in his side and my finger in the nail prints in his hands. I won't believe it. He refused to believe it. He's known as doubting Thomas, right? But yet Thomas here is the one who boldly speaks up and says, let us go with him. By saying this, he clearly thinks they are walking to a death sentence. But he is willing to go because Jesus is going, and he is willing to lay down his life down with Jesus and for Jesus. He's willing to go and follow Jesus to this. This is a boldness that we can model ourselves after. It also says that he's a twin in this passage, which is a unique thing. We aren't told anywhere else about him being a twin. And this is believed not because he was an actual twin like you can have for your children, right? But because he looked like Jesus. This is what they taught, is that he looked most like Jesus. So if he could be, out of all the disciples, someone might mistake him for being Jesus, and they could kill him as a result. So for him, if that's the case, if that's why they're saying that, for him being the one that boldly speaks like, let's go, he's at more risk than the rest of the disciples if he has that same look that they have, or that Jesus had. He's putting himself at more risk, and he's the one that's boldly stepping forward and saying, hey, let's go. If Jesus is going to die, we're going to go with him. Maybe it's going to cost us our lives, but it's going to be worth it. We're going to be willing to go and go with Jesus in this, in what he's doing. Verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Jesus arrives in Bethany, and when he gets there, he hears that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, and he is already buried. He's in the tomb. There's a reason Jesus waited for 4 days. There was a belief at the time that a person's soul would remain with or near their body for 3 days, in hopes that they would be able to return to their body. But after the 3rd day, the soul would depart for the afterlife because the body had started to decompose, and the soul would recognize that it wasn't possible for the body to live again. Jesus ensures that this belief wouldn't have an effect on his miracle. It wouldn't take away from it. His miracle was a miracle, and there was not going to be a reasonable explanation for how it had happened. This is not something that belief of a spirit staying with a body is not something that is taught in the Bible. We're told that at the moment that we die, we are to be dead, is to be in the presence of the Lord. In that moment, in that very moment, at the moment that we take our last breath, we are with Jesus for eternity, for the rest of eternity. There is not a waiting period of a time of soul sleep or anything like that. We are, from that moment, we're in our eternity. We don't have to wait, as they believed here. But Jesus knew this belief, and he wanted to make sure that he delayed so that this wasn't going to be a reason that people could explain his miracle away. He waited for Lazarus' body to start decomposing, is what he literally is waiting for. And we have evidence of that next week when Martha goes and says, "Don't open the tomb because it stinketh." Right? Like, we don't want to go in there. Verse 20. Then Martha, as soon as she had heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." When Martha hears that Jesus had come to their town, she goes out to meet him. And Mary, we are told, remains inside the house. Martha, the one who in the past has been caught up with serving and not sitting and listening to Jesus, is the one who goes to Jesus now. When she came to Jesus, her words would have hurt as she said them. We don't know what tone she used when she spoke to Jesus, but she is grieving. She is sorrowful. She knew she had sent word to Jesus when Lazarus had been alive and was sick. But Jesus just now has come to them 4 days after Lazarus has died. It's too late to heal him in Martha's eyes. And she says, "If you had only been here, my brother would not have died." We don't know if she says this in anger and frustration that Jesus didn't come when they had called him. I am sure she felt some of these emotions. I'm sure likely was angry with Jesus at times because she knew they had sent somebody as a messenger. And that messenger would have returned, and Jesus didn't come with that messenger. And that messenger would not have come for a couple of more days, or Jesus would not have come for a couple more days after that messenger had returned to them. She knows he delayed. She also has seen Jesus heal others, and she's likely wondering, why didn't he heal her brother, his friend? Or maybe when she saw Jesus and she said, "If you had only been here, he would not have died," she said it in a way that is filled with sorrow, and she's letting him know it is too late. Is she saying this in a way that is letting him know that she appreciates him coming and she knows he could have saved her brother, but she also understands that he was delayed, and she understands he didn't heal her brother as he could have, as she has seen him heal many others, and she's just letting him know, like, it's okay. Like, he's already died. It's okay. I know you could have healed him, but you didn't heal him. You were delayed. I don't know. I don't know exactly how this interaction would have been. But after she tells Jesus, if he had been there, her brother would have lived, she tells Jesus also that she knows that whatever Jesus asks of God, she knows that God will do it. I don't think she is asking Jesus to raise her brother from the dead. She didn't know Jesus had the ability, I don't believe, that he could raise someone from the dead that had been dead for this long. I believe this because she's the one who tells Jesus not to roll away the stone. If she thought that Jesus could go and raise her brother from the dead, she would have been the first one saying, "Yeah, get that stone out of here so we can call him back out, so we can raise him from the dead." No, she's saying, "No, don't roll away that stone." Like, what are you thinking, Jesus? Like, we don't want to go and open the tomb now, because she doesn't think that's a possibility, that her brother could live. So I don't think that she's saying that she believes God could raise him from the dead even now. I think she says this because she is saying she is still trusting Jesus. She still believes in him, even though she doesn't understand why he didn't come sooner, as she wanted him to. Martha shows she has a remarkable faith in Jesus. She has a faith that we should model ourselves after. These are likely the hardest days of her life, and she is able to still trust Jesus in them. I look at this as being like when Job, after he had lost everything, including all of his children, he was still able to say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job didn't have an explanation as to why all of the bad things had happened to him, just like Martha doesn't know why Jesus has allowed her brother to die. But both Job and Martha still trusted Jesus in those moments of their sorrow. Their faith in him was still strong. They may feel like they were wavering, but they were still able to say, I want to follow you, Jesus. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And this is what I believe she is saying as she's saying these words to him. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that we will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So Jesus tells Martha her brother Lazarus will rise again, meaning he will live again. Jesus is speaking about his physical body, that his physical body will come back to life. But the idea of his body coming back to life isn't even in the realm of possibilities for Martha. She hasn't even considered this, but she thinks Jesus is talking about her brother living in the last days. She thinks Jesus is talking about being alive in the afterlife in heaven. She knew that death is temporary. It's a temporary separation. And she thinks Jesus is trying to comfort her and letting her know that she will see her brother again. This is often how we comfort those who have lost loved ones. We encourage them by reminding them, because of their faith in Jesus, they're only temporarily separated from them. That when we all die, we're going to be forever in the presence of each other for eternity with our loved ones who have gone on before us, and we're going to be with them again along with Jesus. This is what the Bible teaches, and we know we will be with them again. We don't have to worry about being separated forever because this is only temporary. This is a very comforting thing to hear and know when you lose someone that you love. And this is what Martha thinks Jesus is telling her in this moment. Paul tells us to comfort each other in this way. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18, we're told, but I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with a trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Paul told us this to comfort us. When we die, we are with Jesus. But just because our bodies are dead does not mean we will not get to be a part of the rapture. We will get to be a part of it. Those who are dead are the first ones who are given their new bodies, we're told. And they will be with Jesus when he comes for the rest of the church. And we will all meet Jesus and our loved ones in the air as part of the rapture. Every person who believes in Jesus will get to be a part of this. No one is going to miss it. And Paul tells us this to comfort us. It is intended to be comforting because we know where our hope is. We know where we are going when we die. We know where our loved ones are, and this gives us hope that our world does not have. This is what Paul is telling us, that we have comfort knowing that we are going to be able to see them again. We don't have to sorrow the way the world sorrows. We have hope in when we see someone die before us. This is comforting to us. This is what Martha understood, and she thinks this is what Jesus is speaking about. But Jesus isn't speaking about the afterlife. Even though this is true, he is speaking about Lazarus physically coming back to life, as he's going to prove. Verse 25. We're almost done. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Martha is grieving, and yet Jesus, as he meets her and he is speaking with her, he knows that this is an opportunity to teach her. He wants to deepen her faith and her understanding of him. He told her he will raise Lazarus from the dead, and she took that as him speaking of his spiritual life. When her answer is speaking about spiritual life, Jesus reveals and teaches her how that is possible. He tells her that we can have life because he is the resurrection and the life. He is the one who can resurrect our spirits that are dead, and he can give them life again. This is contained in him and only in him. He tells her, anyone who believes in me, though he may die, as in his physical body dying, he will live. Even though our physical bodies will die, our spirits will be able to go on living for those who believe in Jesus. This is what Jesus is wanting to make clear for Martha. He wants her to understand this and believe it. Jesus then asks her, Martha, do you believe this? Martha, do you believe this? And she goes, and I love her answer. She doesn't go and regurgitate back what he says to her, but she explains what her understanding of who he is back to him. She says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. Martha didn't fully understand how Jesus was able to do what he was telling her, but she does believe he is Christ, the Christ, God's Son. And because she believes this, she tells him exactly what she believes. This is all Jesus asks of us. He just asks that we believe in him. And he will prove to Martha when we come back next week why he is able to say these things, why this is true. And he will build her faith even more in him. And he's going to interact and he's going to communicate with Mary, her sister also. He's going to talk with her. And we'll look at that next week. But Jesus is going to prove why he's got power over death. He's going to raise Lazarus back to life. He's going to bring his physical body back to life. But even more importantly than that, he gives our spiritual spirits life again. And they're reborn again through him. This is kind of part one in this message. This is the first half of this story. But the second half is so much better, right? When we come back next week and we finish up in this story, we're going to see Jesus is going to go and he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead and bring him back to life. For us today, something we can apply from what we went over is, are we placing expectations on Jesus like Mary and Martha when they asked for him to come? They expected him to come and heal their brother, and he didn't. How do we handle when Jesus doesn't meet our expectations? Do we still trust Jesus as Martha did, or are you going to reject him and deny him? Do you want Jesus to love you as a friend with a phileo kind of love, or as a father with an agape, unconditional type of love, and that where his eyes are always on our eternity? That's what we can take with us this week. With that, we'll close with prayer and a song. Jesus, I just thank you for this morning. I thank you for your word. I thank you for what you did for Martha here, that you know the end of the chapter. You knew what she was going to be going through as she's grieving, as she's talking with you, as we're looking at today, and she's wanting to have an understanding, and she's still telling you that she trusts you in that grief and in that sorrow, Lord. Help us to be like Martha. Help us to have that kind of faith in you. Help us to remain steadfast in our faith with you, Lord. And when you don't meet the expectations that we think that you should meet, Lord, help us to continue to walk with you, knowing that these things will come in your timing, that you'll bring them to us in your timing, Lord. And your timing is always intended for our eternity, and it always has our eternity in mind. Help us to be people who have our eyes on eternity rather than on this moment that we're in now, Lord. And when we are stuck in time right now, as we're waiting for you to come back and bring us home, Lord, help us to be eagerly awaiting for your kingdom to come here on this earth, Lord. And we ask, Lord, that you help us to be your hands and feet and be your ambassadors and work with the time that you have given us and use it effectively for your kingdom, Lord.